Whispers of ancient voices drift through the forests and mountains of New Hampshire, a land steeped in mystery and memory. Nestled in the extreme northeastern corner of the United States, this New England state, one of the original 13 colonies, has long stood as a silent witness to centuries of transformation. To the north lies the vast Canadian province of Quebec, while Maine and a slender 16-mile stretch of Atlantic coastline frame the east. The southern border meets Massachusetts, and to the west, the mountains shadow over Vermont. At the heart of this enigmatic state sits Concord, the capital, quietly holding secrets from generations past. Long before the arrival of English settlers, around 3,000 Native Americans lived in what would become New Hampshire. These early inhabitants belonged to clans and semi-autonomous bands, united in a cultural and linguistic web stretching across the Northeast. The most dominant among them were the Pennacook, centered in what is now Concord. Their influence rippled through the valleys and across the rivers. They were part of the Algonquian-speaking Western Abenaki, a people whose spiritual connection to the land echoed in every stone and tree. But with the coming of the English, everything changed. Waves of disease, brutal conflicts, and forced migrations decimated their numbers. By the year 1700, almost none remained within the boundaries of the new colony. Yet their presence has never truly disappeared. Their legacy lingers, not in monuments or records, but in the very names we still speak today. Lake Winnipesaukee, Kankamagus Highway, Mount Passaconaway, each a haunting reminder of a forgotten world, a language of the land, carved into the granite of New Hampshire's soul. This is only the beginning of New Hampshire's history, a story veiled in time, where shadows of the past still roam the hills and echo through the pines. In the shadows of pine forests and river valleys, the seeds of an English colony took root. The region we now call New Hampshire emerged from the ambitions of the English crown in the 1620s. Grants of land whispered across oceans to men like Captain John Mason. By 1623, a modest fishing and trading outpost was quietly established along the coast, and just 6 years later, the name New Hampshire was born, an echo of the English county of Hampshire, now cast upon a wilderness between the Merrimack and Piscataqua rivers. Early settlements, Dover, Portsmouth, Exeter, and Hampton, sprang up like sentinels in the mist. These towns would become more than mere dots on a map. They were the fragile footholds of empire, carved into land once sacred to native peoples. But this fledgling colony was not left to grow in peace. From 1641 to 1679, Massachusetts laid claim to the territory, imposing its own rule. Yet conflicts, territorial and religious, festered beneath the surface. Disputes between Massachusetts and the heirs of Mason eventually fractured the uneasy alliance. In 1679, New Hampshire broke away, becoming a separate royal province under the watchful eye of the crown. Even then, the land knew no rest. For decades, bitter boundary feuds erupted, lines drawn and redrawn, particularly where the New Hampshire grant overlapped what would later become Vermont. The specter of conflict stretched like a storm cloud over the wilderness, lingering well into the years before the American Revolution. Through it all, one name stood firm in the annals of colonial governance: Benning Wentworth. From 1741 to 1767, he held the office of royal governor, longer than any other colonial leader. His shadow still looms over New Hampshire's early institutions. By 1767, the colony's first census revealed a growing presence: 52,700 souls living among forests, hills, and rivers. 5 counties had been carved into the land. 5 more would follow after 1800. Yet it was not just settlers building homes. It was soldiers forging history. New Hampshire's men fought fiercely in the long, brutal colonial wars between Britain and France from 1689 to 1763, wars that soaked the soil in blood and ambition. As the colonial era drew to a close, the seat of government settled in Portsmouth, and the province claimed 147 chartered towns, each a quiet testament to the resilience and resolve of a colony forever caught between the wild and the crown. The echoes of those early days still resonate in stone walls, weathered town halls, and forgotten forest trails. The story of New Hampshire's colonial past is not just one of settlement, but of mystery, conflict, and survival. As tensions across the colonies reached a boiling point, a spark ignited in the icy December winds of 1774, not in Boston, but in Newcastle, New Hampshire. There, beneath the looming shadow of Fort William and Mary, now known as Fort Constitution, armed colonists struck. They seized the fort, defying British rule with a boldness that foretold the coming storm. This little-known event was one of the earliest acts of armed resistance in the American colonies. It sent a clear message. The spirit of rebellion had already taken root in the rocky soil of New Hampshire. The people of New Hampshire, steadfast and fierce, overwhelmingly supported the revolutionary cause. When the call to arms came, they answered, not with hesitation, but with resolve. The state sent 2 brigadier generals, 3 full regiments, and hundreds of militiamen to the Continental Army, ready to face the might of the British Empire. In January 1776, months before the Declaration of Independence, New Hampshire took a decisive step into the unknown. It established its own state government, becoming the first colony to do so. And in June, its delegates were instructed to vote for independence in Philadelphia. This small state would cast the 9th and final vote to ratify the U.S. Constitution in 1788, the vote that turned a fragile idea into a binding reality. But revolution was only the beginning. With independence secured, New Hampshire surged forward into a new age. The land, once wild and uncertain, began to hum with life and labor. Sheep farming spread across the hills. Rivers like the Merrimack powered early manufacturing, with Manchester becoming a hub of industry, its mills pulsing with the rhythm of the 19th century. As railroads carved new paths through the Northeast, New Hampshire became a vital link in the expanding web of commerce and migration. Portsmouth and nearby towns rose as shipbuilding centers, their harbors filled with the scent of pine and the sound of hammer on hull. In 1846, Manchester became the first incorporated city in the state, a sign that the wilderness had given way to structure, to ambition, to progress. Yet the mysterious legacy of the state did not fade. It shaped minds as well as landscapes. From this rugged terrain came towering figures: Daniel Webster, the voice of union and law; Franklin Pierce, the 14th President of the United States; and Salmon P. Chase, a Chief Justice and guardian of liberty. In every stone mill and timbered farmhouse, in every snow-swept town and shadowed wood, New Hampshire's history lingers. A story forged in rebellion, built in resilience, and forever marked by the quiet, unstoppable force of a people determined to define their own fate. As the smoke of war lifted after the Civil War, New Hampshire entered a new era, an age gilded in wealth, industry, and deepening divides. The Gilded Age swept across America like a tide, and New Hampshire felt its full force. The state, though small, played a vital role in the Civil War, not only with thousands of men enlisted under Union banners, but through the heartbeat of its industry. In cities like Manchester, Nashua, Claremont, and Laconia, the clang of iron and the hum of machines echoed through mills and workshops. Blankets, uniforms, shoes, and rifles flowed from New Hampshire's factories to the front lines of battle. But even when the war ended, the machines did not fall silent. The post-war decades brought booming growth. Immigrants, first Irish, German, and French Canadian, and later newcomers from Eastern and Southern Europe, poured into the state's mill towns. They labored in tanneries and textile mills, building new lives in the shadow of smokestacks and brick tenements. The industrial cities flourished with wealth and energy. But as urban centers rose, something else was quietly fading. In the hills and valleys beyond the factories, New Hampshire's farms began to wither. With grains, wool, and meat now imported at low cost, local agriculture could no longer compete. Fields lay fallow, barns emptied. Farm families, long rooted in this rugged land, abandoned their homes or turned instead to the perishables, milk, fruit, and vegetables, desperately adapting to survive. And yet, amid this quiet collapse, something unexpected stirred in the countryside. Wealthy urbanites, drawn by the call of the wild and the promise of mountain air, began to arrive. Gilded Age tourism was born. Grand hotels rose like palaces in the wilderness, along the White Mountains, beside tranquil lakes, and near the crashing waves of the seacoast. Each summer, thousands fled the cities for a taste of New Hampshire's serene mystery. Even the forests, once untouched, became part of this strange transformation. Commercial logging surged through the northern frontier. Logging railroads were carved deep into the White Mountains. In towns like Berlin, mills consumed entire hillsides, converting ancient timber into pulp and paper. By the end of the 19th century, one power reigned above all: the Boston and Maine Railroad. It dominated New Hampshire's transportation, controlling all but a narrow sliver of the state's vast rail system. These rail barons didn't just guide trains, they steered state politics itself. As the 20th century dawned, the mystery of New Hampshire deepened. The state's old world, family farms, small communities, self-sufficiency, faded into memory. Yet, industry surged ahead. In Manchester, the mighty Amoskeag Manufacturing Company stood as the largest textile mill on earth. From Boston, investors pulled the strings, funneling capital into the state's booming enterprises. But not all voices were silenced. Progressive leaders in New Hampshire saw through the golden veneer. They fought back against outside control, pushing for reform, direct primaries, workers' rights, and child labor laws. And as the logging companies clear-cut the soul of the White Mountains, another voice rose: the Society for the Protection of New Hampshire Forests. Through their efforts, a vision began to take root: the creation of what would become the White Mountain National Forest. In this clash between old and new, exploitation and preservation, a deeper truth about New Hampshire's history emerged. This was not a state frozen in time, but one constantly reborn, its spirit shaped by struggle, survival, and the enduring mystery of the land itself. But prosperity, like the northern winds, did not linger long in New Hampshire. By the early 20th century, the foundations that once supported the state's booming industry began to crack. The textile mills and shoe factories that had fueled New Hampshire's growth were growing obsolete, machines outdated, locations far removed from raw materials and markets. The mighty Boston and Maine Railroad, once a symbol of economic dominance, found itself burdened with high costs and unprofitable lines. The golden age was fading. Even the grandeur of the White Mountains could not shield the state from change. After World War I, the opulent grand hotels that once catered to wealthy tourists began to lose their allure. As automobiles filled the roads and highways stretched deeper into the countryside, travelers turned to humbler lodgings, tea houses, roadside cottages, tourist homes, and campsites. The elegance of the past gave way to a more modest, mobile world. By the 1920s, job cuts swept through the mills, and the railroad entered receivership. Then came the Great Depression. It hit New Hampshire with unrelenting force. Factories shuttered. Mills that once thundered with productivity, including the famed Amoskeag Manufacturing Company, fell silent. Even the Brown Paper Company in Berlin, once a symbol of northern prosperity, declared bankruptcy. The state's industrial soul seemed to vanish into the mist. And yet, in war, the state found temporary revival. With the onset of World War II, government contracts breathed life into the remaining factories. Unemployment vanished. Young men either enlisted or found work at home. The Portsmouth Naval Shipyard, just across the border in Kittery, Maine, became New Hampshire's largest single employer, its dry docks churning with wartime production. But as the guns quieted in Europe and the Pacific, so too did the hum of industry. Government contracts ended. The brief economic revival slipped away. And yet, even in this uncertain moment, New Hampshire would again stand at the crossroads of world history. In 1944, as the war neared its close, leaders from across the globe gathered beneath the pines at Bretton Woods. There, within the quiet walls of a mountain resort, two of the most influential post-war institutions were born: the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. The world's financial future had been charted in the heart of New Hampshire. Then, slowly, the tide turned. The 1950s marked the beginning of a long, steady resurgence. As old industries faded, new ones rose, companies producing machinery, precision instruments, electrical goods, and eventually computers transformed the state's economy. By the 1960s, New Hampshire was one of the fastest-growing states east of the Mississippi, its population surging, its identity evolving. And with this economic rebirth came political transformation. Long a Republican stronghold, Dating back to the days when Amos Tuck of Exeter helped found the party in the 1850s, New Hampshire began to shift. The Democratic Party reemerged, claiming gubernatorial seats, congressional victories, and a new foothold in state politics. But in the national imagination, New Hampshire is best known for something far more symbolic: its first-in-the-nation presidential primary. Since 1952, when the ballot first included actual candidates' names, this modest New England state has played an outsized role in shaping American presidential races. Every 4 years, the country looks to New Hampshire, to its towns, its debates, its snowy streets, for a glimpse into the nation's political soul. And through it all, rise and fall, war and peace, factories and forests, New Hampshire's history has endured, mysterious, resilient, and forever etched into the granite of its mountains and the quiet strength of its people. The closing decades of the 20th century and the dawn of the 21st brought new prosperity to New Hampshire, but it was not without its cost. The forests, rivers, and granite hills that once drew only a quiet few now welcomed waves of new residents, tourists, and developers. Rapid population growth fueled construction and commerce, breathing new life into towns across the state. But with each new road carved, with each field replaced by concrete, a question echoed louder. How do you preserve the soul of a place while building for its future? Communities across New Hampshire found themselves walking a fine line, balancing economic opportunity with a deep desire to protect the land that defined them. The very wilderness that had once drawn artists, adventurers, and visionaries now faced increasing pressure from expansion and development. At the same time, local governments struggled under the weight of rising costs. With most of their revenue dependent on property taxes, towns were forced to make difficult decisions about how to fund schools, infrastructure, and public services, without losing the character and calm that had made New Hampshire special in the first place. And so, even today, the story of New Hampshire's history continues, one of tension between growth and preservation, change and tradition, a story not only of battles and industries, but of identity, resilience, and the ongoing mystery of a state forever caught between its rugged past and its uncertain future. If you've enjoyed exploring the hidden corners of New Hampshire's history, don't stop here. Subscribe to History Love for more deep dives into the fascinating, forgotten, and mysterious stories of America's past. Like the video if you learned something new. Comment below what surprised you most about New Hampshire's journey. And don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss an episode from History Love, where history isn't just told, it's uncovered.